Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics with the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look at the use of checkboxes on Windows forms. In order to demonstrate the use of checkboxes, we are currently in the PowerBasic Forms Designer. This allows us to create dialogues and to place controls upon those dialogues. If we look at our toolkit here, there are two controls here we're going to be working with. First of all, the checkbox control and the check 3 state box control. If we double click on the checkbox, we'll get a checkbox on the screen which we can then position. So there is our first checkbox. If we save this and go back to our source code, it will reload and we can see that a checkbox has now been added to the function which controls all the objects for that dialog. So if we run our application now, we will see our checkbox appears on the screen, and it allows us to either tick or untick the checkbox. In order to make this a little more readable, we're going to add a new font. So we've added 2 lines of code for the font, one to add it as a new font before we show the dialog, and one to end the font after the dialog completes. So as we're going to be adding several checkboxes to this form, I'm going to use the prefix command to make it nice and easy and tidy to add more controls to the control set font command. This will set the font for our first checkbox to the font we've just specified. So before we run the application, we'll need to declare the hfont variable as a dword. So if we try running the application now, we'll see that our checkbox does appear in a much larger font and is therefore easier to see. So what other options do we have in the Forms Designer for a checkbox? If we double click on the checkbox and have a look at the styles, there are a few options in here worth looking at. We can set the position of the text to be either at the top. As you'll see, it's now moved up. You can set it at the center, which is the default, or you can set it at the bottom. We'll leave this one at the center. Also, you can shift it left, right, and centered. So your text is now centered in the width of the control. So you have some flexibility in how the text is actually displayed. So we'll move it back to the left-hand side for the moment. However, you don't have in here the option of setting the foreground color. You can't change the color of the text from inside this box. But we'll come back to the color of the text later on in the video. So what I want to do now is to pick up the value of this checkbox. Is it ticked or is it not ticked? So let's go back to the code. So I'm going to add a text box in here into which we can actually put text to explain what's actually happened on the screen. So we will declare the constant for this text box at the top of the code. So we're now going to look at the callback function, the event handler, who has the task of picking up events where the object has been clicked upon. So we're going to declare a local variable called result, which is going to pick up the value of our checkbox. And further down the code in the command section, there is already a case statement for checkbox 1. Checkboxes in Windows are a special kind of button. Therefore, we can use the same kind of logic as we would when someone clicks on a button. This picks up the button click, and in here we can actually interrogate the checkbox to see what its current state is. So we can use the control get check command, giving it the parameters of the handle of the dialog and the handle of the control, and we're passing this to our result variable. We're using this construct here, cb.ctl. This is the value of the control that actually has been clicked upon. We could have put in checkbox 1, But as we're going to be adding several checkboxes, I want to reuse the code in this case. So we can now put in a select case statement to determine the value of the checkbox. Ordinary checkboxes only have two states. They are either unchecked or they are checked. If the value returned from this control get check statement returns 0, then it is unchecked. If it returns the value 1, then it's checked. So we can then set the value in our text output to say either unchecked or checked. I've left a third state in here, which we will tackle later on in the video. This is for the 3-state checkboxes. So if we try running our code now, so the checkbox is now appearing on screen. If we tick the checkbox, then the word checked appears in our text box, and if we untick it, the word unchecked. So we are correctly determining the current state of our checkbox. So as we're going to have several checkboxes on the screen, I want to make this code quite generic. So we're going to create a new function which is going to do what this piece of code is currently doing, allowing us to reuse it for the other checkboxes we're going to be adding. So we're going to be creating a new function called displayCheckState. This will take 3 parameters: the handle of the dialog, the handle of the control, and the handle to the text box we wish to put the text into. This will allow us to get rid of all of this code, making our code much tidier. So let's create the new function. And here is our new function with the 3 parameters we mentioned. So the first thing to do in here is to declare our local variable and to use the control get check command to get the value in the checkbox. So I'm now adding 2 additional checkboxes to our dialog. I'm adding the normal checkbox, and I'm adding a check 3-state box. If we update the constants at the beginning of our application, so if we now go back into our forms designer, and we can see we have the 3 checkboxes on the screen: checkbox 1, checkbox 2, and a third checkbox, which is a 3-state checkbox. We can see the 3 checkboxes: checkbox 1, which has the larger font, checkbox 2, and checkbox 3. So let's make all checkboxes use the same font. So we have our prefix control set font command in here. We'll just add the 2 new checkboxes to that list. As we've added new checkboxes, we'll need to go to our event handler, our callback function, and put some additional code in. So we have the event in for checkbox 1. Now, as the code in here is completely generic, we can just copy that and paste it into both checkbox 2 and the 3-state checkbox. So if we try running that code now, it should correctly pick up checkbox 1, also checkbox 2, and if we pick the third checkbox, it is checked. The second state is indeterminate, and it puts a square into the middle of the checkbox, and the final state is unchecked, and it will cycle within these 3 states each time you click. So the other thing I mentioned earlier in the video was we didn't have the ability to change the text color for each of these checkboxes. We'll now see how we can actually achieve this. If we look at the beginning of the code, you'll see that using the forms designer puts this line of code into your includes, the checkboxes PBR. The checkboxes PBR is a compiled resource. We can see the PBR file in here. Now, if we copy the RC file into our PowerBasic window and have a look to see what goes into this, and all it's actually doing is adding this line of code, the manifest. In a moment, we're going to start adding extra resources to our application, but I don't want to mix the use of the PBR file and resources command within the PowerBasic application. So what I'm going to do is to comment out this line of code. And I'm going to replace this line of code with this single resource command to specify the resource manifest. and the application will still run quite happily and do all you would expect it to do. Now we can determine what the XP theme XML file, the manifest, is actually doing. It's putting a theme on your application. If we comment this out and run the application again, the application will still run fine, but you'll notice that the objects on screen look slightly different. The tick box, when it is indeterminate, is effectively greyed out. So the addition of the manifest is actually changing the theme of your application. Now that we've commented out the theme, it gives us more control over checkboxes. If we go back to the function where our dialog is set up, now I'm going to use the control set color command to attempt to change the color of the text for each of the checkboxes to make the foreground color blue and the background color left as is. If we run the application now, we will see that we now have control over the color of the checkbox. If we go back and put the manifest back in again and run the application again, we can see that the color has gone. So the XML theme is actually turning off our ability to control the color of checkboxes. So for the moment, I'm going to comment out the manifest line. The other thing that's worth noting, if we have a look at the standard checkbox in the Forms Designer, if we look at the styles, you'll see that in this section here, it defaults to the BS text option. But there are two other options for icon and bitmap. So can we set an icon rather than text against one of the checkboxes? As I said, the checkbox is in fact a button in Windows. It's a special kind of button that displays the tick box. So let's go back to the code. So let's for the moment comment out checkbox number 2. And further down the code, we're going to add in some graphics. So first of all, we will put back checkbox 2 and we will use the control add button command. And we're setting this to be auto checkbox, which will make it a checkbox, but we're going to be defining an icon. And the icon we're going to be adding is this one, add icon. So we're going to use a Windows API call called load image. This will allow us to load from file an icon. The load image command takes a number of parameters, the first of which is the null value. The next is the name of the file we wish to load, in this case an icon. We're defining it as an icon, and we're using the load from file option, using the default colors. And having loaded that value into our handle HImage, we can then use a control send command to send that image to our checkbox. As so. Now we've declared an HImage variable, therefore we'll need to define that at the beginning of our code. So if we try running that now, we will see that our second checkbox now no longer has text, but it does have an icon in place. The checkbox will still operate as it did before. But we now have the option of placing an icon against a checkbox, which in some cases could be useful. So let's add another checkbox, but this time with a different image. So I've created a bitmap image here, which I'm just going to paste in. And this bitmap image is going to be a longer image with the plus icon at the beginning and a piece of text following it. So we want to load that bitmap up and display it in place of the text. So we're going to create a third checkbox with an image. So as we did before, we're going to use the control add button command, but this time the option we're giving it is BS bitmap. And we will use the load image command again, but this time pointing it towards our confirm bitmap, with an option of bitmap this time as opposed to the icon one we used previously. And again, we'll use the control send command to send that image to our control. So if we run our code now, we will see we now have a large bitmap sitting beside the tick box. Now you can create bitmaps and position them on screen separately from the checkboxes. However, this approach allows the image to be permanently attached to the checkbox itself and gives quite a visual appearance to what the user is doing on screen. And as before, we will need to put some code in place in the event handler to handle the events when the user clicks on this checkbox. So we will just copy this piece of code and we will change the value to checkbox 3. And checkbox 3 is now working perfectly well. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we've looked at the checkbox and the 3-state checkbox. We've avoided using the XP manifest to allow us to set the colour of the text on a checkbox control. And additionally, we have used both an icon and a bitmap rather than text on a standard checkbox. So this will give you, hopefully, a great deal more flexibility on how you can use checkboxes within your applications. However, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.